Thanks, babe. The word slipped out so naturally that I took 2 more steps before I realized what I had said. Charlotte didn't follow me. The small paper cup she had just handed me was still warm between my fingers. Around us, the town park was filled with ordinary Friday evening sounds. Dogs barking, children near the fountain, a street musician playing the same 3 chords over and over. But behind me, there was nothing. No footsteps, no sarcastic reply, no Charlotte telling me I had ordered the wrong coffee again. I stopped. Slowly, I turned around. She was standing outside the little cafe exactly where I had left her. One hand held her own coffee. The other rested against the strap of her purse. Her cheeks had turned pink. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. And Charlotte Brown was not someone who embarrassed easily. She had once corrected a police officer for mispronouncing her street name. She had argued with a restaurant manager over a $7 salad. She had delivered a speech at her sister's wedding after the microphone stopped working. But now, one careless word had made her completely silent. She looked directly at me. "What did you just call me?" My mouth opened. Nothing came out. I glanced at the coffee in my hand as if it might explain everything. I said thanks. Her eyebrows lifted. "That wasn't all you said." I may have added another word. "You may have." I could see the smile she was trying to hide. That somehow made it worse. "I wasn't thinking." Charlotte took one slow step toward me. "So you call women babe when you're not thinking?" "No." "Interesting. I mean, not usually." "Usually?" That came out wrong. Her smile finally escaped. Then she looked down at her cup, and for one brief second, I saw something in her expression I had never seen before. Hope. It disappeared so quickly that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. Almost. If someone had told me that one accidental word would change a friendship that had survived 12 years, 3 bad relationships, 2 family funerals, and more late-night phone calls than either of us could count, I would have laughed. But that was exactly what happened. My name is William Carter. I was 32 years old, lived in a quiet town in Vermont, and worked as an insurance adjuster. A job that mostly involved explaining bad news to people while pretending paperwork could make it better. Charlotte was 31. She taught 4th grade at the same elementary school we had attended as children. And until that Friday evening, I believed she was simply my best friend. The person who had a spare key to my house. The person who knew I hated tomatoes but always forgot I liked pickles. The person I called when life went wrong. What I didn't understand yet was that Charlotte had been waiting years for me to call her something other than a friend. And babe was only the beginning. 3 weeks earlier, if you had asked anyone in our town whether Charlotte and I were dating, at least half of them would have answered yes. The other half would have asked why we weren't. We laughed every time someone made that assumption. Charlotte usually rolled her eyes. I'd shrug and say, "You've all watched too many romantic movies." The truth was much simpler. She had been my best friend for 12 years. And somewhere along the way, being around her had become as natural as breathing. Every Saturday morning, without planning it, we'd end up doing something together. Sometimes we'd visit the local farmer's market. Sometimes we'd hike one of the nearby trails. Sometimes we'd simply grab coffee and walk through town for hours, talking about absolutely nothing. That Saturday was no different. The first warm weekend of spring had finally arrived. The sidewalks were busy. Families filled the park. Street musicians had returned after the long winter. Charlotte texted me around 10. "Coffee?" I smiled before I even replied. "Same place?" Obviously. The woman behind the counter already knew our order. Large black coffee for me. Vanilla latte for Charlotte. "You two finally getting married?" She joked as she handed us our drinks. Charlotte laughed. "Not today." I shook my head. "We're just friends." The cashier smiled, the kind of smile that said she didn't believe either of us. Neither did the elderly couple sitting near the window, or the teenager wiping tables, or the mailman who waved at us outside. At this point, the entire town had apparently decided our future before we had. Charlotte nudged my shoulder. "One day they're going to stop asking." "I hope so." "I don't." I looked at her. "You don't." She smiled into her coffee. "It's kind of funny." I laughed. You enjoy watching me explain the same thing every weekend? A little. You're evil. I've been telling you that for years. She bumped my arm again, and we started walking toward the park. It was one of those perfect afternoons where nobody seemed to be in a hurry. We passed children flying kites, an old man feeding ducks, a young couple taking engagement photos near the lake. Charlotte stopped walking. Look at them. The ducks. She laughed. No. The couple. The photographer asked them to hold hands. The woman couldn't stop smiling. Charlotte watched quietly for a few seconds. Then she asked something that caught me completely off guard. William. Yeah. Do you ever think about getting married? I looked at her, surprised. I guess. Someday. She nodded slowly. So do I. Then she started walking again before I could ask another question. At the time, I thought it was just another random conversation. Looking back, I should have realized she wasn't talking about marriage. She was trying to find out if there was room in my future for someone. I just didn't understand that someone might have been walking beside me all along. That evening should have ended like every other Saturday. Didn't. As we left the park, Charlotte looked at me with that familiar grin. Come on. Where? I need groceries. You always need groceries. And you always complain before helping me carry them. Because somehow I always end up carrying everything. She laughed. Exactly. 20 minutes later, we were pushing a shopping cart through the small neighborhood grocery store. Charlotte walked ahead of me, tossing random things into the cart. Strawberries, pasta, orange juice, a ridiculous amount of chocolate. You know that's enough candy for a month, right? She looked over her shoulder. You say that every time, because every time you finish it in 3 days. I have stressful students. You have fourth graders. Exactly. I laughed. Somehow every ordinary moment with her felt easy. There was never any pressure. No awkward silence. No need to impress each other. Just comfort. While she compared 2 different brands of pasta sauce, I noticed an elderly man reaching for something on the top shelf. Without thinking, I grabbed it for him. Thank you, son, he said. Charlotte watched the whole thing. You do that every single time. Do what? Help strangers. I just saved him from climbing the shelf. She smiled. It's one of my favorite things about you. I pretended not to hear the last sentence. For some reason, compliments from Charlotte always made me uncomfortable. Not because I didn't like them, because I cared about them more than I admitted. We paid for the groceries and walked outside. The sky had turned golden. Charlotte unlocked her car while I carried the bags. Before opening the trunk, she suddenly asked, Can I ask you something? You already are. She rolled her eyes. Seriously? I nodded. Have you ever thought that maybe? She stopped. Maybe what? She looked away toward the parking lot. Never mind. No. I smiled. You started it. She sighed. I was just wondering why neither of us has ever dated someone for very long. I shrugged. I guess I never met the right person. She looked directly into my eyes. What if you already have? For a second, my brain simply stopped working. Before I could answer, someone's shopping cart crashed into another one nearby. The loud noise broke the moment. Charlotte blinked, then smiled as if she hadn't just asked one of the strangest questions in 12 years. Forget it. She opened the trunk. Help me with the bags. I stood there for another second. Something inside me wanted to ask her exactly what she meant. Instead, I picked up the groceries and let the conversation disappear. It would take me almost 3 weeks and one accidental word to realize she had been giving me the answer all along. Monday morning felt strangely different. Not because anything had changed, because I couldn't stop thinking about what Charlotte had asked me in the grocery store. What if you already have? The question kept replaying in my head while I worked. I answered emails, processed claims, sat through 2 meetings, but every now and then, I'd hear her voice again. What if you already have? By lunchtime, I finally gave up pretending to concentrate. I grabbed my phone. Charlotte had already sent me 3 messages. Don't forget dinner at your grandmother's tomorrow. She'll never forgive us if we're late. Also, you still owe me coffee after making me carry those heavy grocery bags. I laughed. She had carried exactly one bag. The lightest one. I replied. I carried everything. Her answer came almost instantly. Emotionally, I carried you. I couldn't help smiling. That was Charlotte. She always knew how to make an ordinary day feel lighter. Tuesday evening arrived faster than I expected. Every other week, my grandmother invited both of us over for dinner. At some point, Charlotte had stopped being a guest. She was simply family. When I pulled into Grandma Eleanor's driveway, Charlotte's car was already there. Of course, she was always early. I walked inside without knocking. The smell of homemade chicken pot pie filled the house. Grandma looked up from the kitchen. There you are. Charlotte stood beside her, wearing one of Grandma's old floral aprons. She turned around and smiled. You're late. I looked at the clock. By 2 minutes. Grandma laughed. I told her you'd say that. Charlotte folded her arms. And I told her you'd still be late. I hate both of you. No, you don't, Grandma said. She was right. I didn't. Dinner was loud. Mostly because Grandma enjoyed telling embarrassing stories about me. Apparently, Charlotte had heard every single one before. She laughed anyway. After we finished eating, Grandma insisted that she and Charlotte clean the kitchen while I carried a few old boxes down to the basement. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard Grandma's voice upstairs. Not clearly, just enough to know they were talking about something serious. Then, I heard my own name. I froze. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But hearing your name has a strange effect. You stop walking without even thinking. Grandma spoke first. How much longer are you going to wait? A few seconds of silence. Then Charlotte answered so quietly I almost couldn't hear her. I don't know. Sweetheart. I don't want to lose him. You won't. What if I do? Grandma sighed. I've watched the two of you for years. Another pause. That boy looks at you differently than he looks at anyone else. Charlotte gave a small laugh. He doesn't. He just doesn't know it yet. My heart started beating faster. I should have walked away. I knew that. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, waiting to hear what Charlotte would say next. I should have walked upstairs. I knew that. Instead, I stood frozen on the basement steps, staring at an old cardboard box I wasn't really seeing. Grandma spoke again. Charlotte. Trust me. A few seconds passed before Charlotte answered. I'm afraid. Grandma's voice softened. Of what? Of losing the only friendship that's ever mattered this much. Silence. Then Grandma laughed quietly. Not because anything was funny. Because she'd probably seen something neither of us could. Sometimes, she said, the greatest risk isn't telling someone how you feel. Another pause. It's waiting until it's too late. I heard a chair slide across the kitchen floor. That was enough. I quietly carried the box the rest of the way downstairs. When I came back up a few minutes later, both of them were talking about flowers in Grandma's garden as if nothing had happened. Charlotte looked at me and smiled. The same smile I'd seen 1,000 times before, yet somehow felt different. Maybe because I'd heard words I wasn't supposed to hear. Or maybe because, for the first time, I started wondering if everyone else had been seeing something I had completely missed. As we drove home later that evening, neither of us mentioned the conversation. Instead, Charlotte connected her phone to the car speakers. Soft country music filled the silence. She looked out the window. You know. Yeah. Promise me something. Depends. She laughed. Promise me that no matter what happens, we'll always stay friends. The question caught me off guard. I smiled. That's the easiest promise I've ever made. She nodded, but instead of looking relieved, she looked disappointed. Only for a second. Then she smiled again. Good. I didn't understand that expression. Not then. The next few days became strangely confusing. Nothing obvious had changed. Charlotte still texted me every morning. Still sent me pictures of funny signs she found around town. Still called whenever one of her students said something ridiculous. But there were little moments that hadn't existed before. She'd catch me looking at her. Instead of looking away, she'd smile. Sometimes she'd hold eye contact just a little longer than usual. Other times she'd ask questions that seemed completely ordinary, until I thought about them later. Do you ever wonder what your life will look like in 10 years? Have you ever believed in bad timing? Do you think people can be in love without realizing it? Every time I answered honestly. Every time she simply nodded, never explaining why she'd asked. It was starting to drive me crazy. For the first time in years, I couldn't predict Charlotte. And somehow, that made me notice things I'd never noticed before. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear whenever she felt nervous. The tiny freckle near her left cheek. How she always saved the last French fry and then pretended she wasn't hungry anymore. I'd seen all those things before. I just hadn't really seen them. Something was changing. I just couldn't figure out whether it was Charlotte or me. Friday finally arrived. The workday dragged on longer than usual. Around 4 in the afternoon my phone buzzed. Charlotte, I'm done early today. I smiled. Congratulations. Coffee? You don't even have to ask. Same cafe. See you in 30. The little cafe on Maple Street had become our place years ago. The owner knew our names. The waitress knew our order. Sometimes our coffees were already being made before we even reached the counter. Charlotte was sitting outside when I arrived. She looked up and smiled. You're 3 minutes late. You're counting? Always. I laughed as I sat across from her. You need a hobby. You are my hobby. She said it so casually that I nearly choked on the sip I'd just taken. She laughed immediately. Relax. I'm joking. One day your jokes are going to give me a heart attack. Not today. For a moment we simply sat there watching people pass by. An elderly couple walked hand in hand. Charlotte followed them with her eyes. They're adorable. They are. Do you think we'll ever have something like that? I looked at the couple. I hope so. She didn't ask anything else. Instead, she quietly smiled into her coffee. As the sun began to set, we decided to walk through the park. It had become almost a tradition. Coffee first, walk second, conversation third. The air smelled like fresh grass after the afternoon rain. Children chased each other across the playground. Someone nearby was playing an old country song on a guitar. Charlotte walked beside me with her hands in the pockets of her light jacket. Can I ask you something? I laughed. You've been asking me strange questions all week. Have I? Definitely. She looked down at the path. Then here's one more. I waited. Why have you never introduced me to any woman you've dated? I frowned. Because none of those relationships lasted long enough. That's not the real reason. Isn't it? She shook her head. No. I looked at her. Then what's the real reason? She smiled. I was hoping you'd tell me. I opened my mouth and closed it again. The truth was, I didn't know. Not because I was hiding anything. Because I'd never actually thought about it. Before I could answer, Charlotte stopped in front of a small flower stand near the entrance to the park. Wait here. She walked over and bought a single sunflower. When she came back, she held it out toward me. For me? No, she laughed. For your grandmother. She'll love it. I know. We continued walking. A few minutes later, we reached the small cafe on the other side of the park. Charlotte offered to grab us another coffee for the walk home. Stay here, she said. I'll be right back. I nodded. A couple of minutes later she returned, balancing 2 paper cups. She handed one to me. I took it without looking up. My phone vibrated in my other hand, and I glanced at the screen while reaching for the coffee. The words left my mouth before my brain had a chance to catch them. Thanks, babe. Silence. I took 2 steps. Then I realized exactly what I'd just said. My heart skipped a beat. Slowly, I turned around. Charlotte hadn't moved. She was still holding her own coffee with both hands. Her eyes met mine. For a second, neither of us said anything. Then she smiled. Not the playful smile I knew so well. This one was softer, almost nervous. What did you just call me? I blinked. I looked down at the coffee in my hand as if it could somehow save me. I didn't mean. She took a slow step closer. You didn't mean what? I wasn't thinking. So, you accidentally called me, babe? I rubbed the back of my neck. I guess I did. She lowered her eyes for a moment. When she looked back at me, There was a warmth in them I'd never noticed before. I kind of liked it. My heartbeat instantly doubled. You did. She gave a tiny shrug. It sounded nice. I laughed awkwardly. Well, that wasn't exactly planned. I know. Another silence. Not uncomfortable. Just different. For the first time in 12 years, I didn't know what to say to Charlotte. And judging by the expression on her face, neither did she. We started walking again. Much slower than before. Neither of us touched the subject. Instead, we talked about work. About the weather. About Grandma Eleanor's roses that finally started blooming. Anything except what had just happened. But every few minutes, I'd catch Charlotte smiling to herself, almost like she was replaying that one word in her head. When we reached her car, she unlocked the door but didn't get inside. She turned toward me. So, see you tomorrow? Of course. She nodded. Then, just before opening the door, she looked straight into my eyes. Good night. She paused. A tiny smile appeared again. William. For some reason, I had expected her to tease me, to call me babe back, to laugh. She didn't, and somehow, that affected me even more. As I drove home that evening, I realized something strange. For 12 years, saying goodnight to Charlotte had been the most ordinary thing in the world. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her smile, or the way she'd quietly admitted, I kind of liked it. I had no idea whether I just made the biggest mistake of my life, or the best one. I just knew one thing. Nothing between us felt ordinary anymore. The next morning, I woke up to a message from Charlotte. Good morning. That was it. No joke. No meme. No sarcastic comment about how I was probably still asleep. Just, good morning. I stared at my phone for a few seconds before replying. Morning. A second later, another message appeared. Hope you have a good day. I smiled without realizing it. Something had definitely changed. I just couldn't tell if it was because of one accidental word, or because we'd both finally started noticing something that had always been there. Saturday afternoon, Grandma Eleanor called. William. Hi, Grandma. I need your help. What's wrong? My backyard fence finally gave up. I laughed. So you're calling your favorite grandson? My only grandson. Fair enough. And bring Charlotte. She already invited herself? Grandma chuckled. No, I did. An hour later, Charlotte pulled into Grandma's driveway. She stepped out wearing jeans, white sneakers, and an oversized blue sweatshirt. She looked at the broken fence. I thought we were replacing one board. Grandma smiled innocently. So did I. I looked at the fence. Half of it was lying on the ground. I sighed. This is going to take all afternoon. Charlotte looked at me. Good thing you're not doing it alone. For the next few hours, we worked side by side. I removed the broken boards. Charlotte held the new ones while I secured them. Grandma sat on the porch with a glass of lemonade, giving us advice nobody had asked for. A little to the left. William, that board isn't straight. Charlotte. Tell him it's crooked. Charlotte laughed. She's right. Of course she is, I muttered. Grandma looked far too pleased with herself. Around sunset, we finally finished. I stepped back and looked at the fence. Not bad. Charlotte wiped a little dust from her hands. I'd hire us. Grandma slowly walked over. She looked at the fence, then at us, then smiled. I've been waiting years to see the two of you build something together. Charlotte lowered her eyes. I laughed awkwardly. It's just a fence. Grandma shook her head. No, William. I don't think it is. Before I could ask what she meant, she turned around and walked back toward the house. Charlotte watched her go, then quietly said, Sometimes I think your grandmother knows everything. I've been thinking the same thing lately. She looked at me for a moment, long enough to make my heart beat faster. Then she smiled. So, want to take a walk before we go home? I nodded. Yeah. We started walking down the small country road behind Grandma's house. The sun was disappearing behind the hills. Everything felt peaceful. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. For the first time, the silence itself felt comfortable. After a few minutes, Charlotte suddenly reached for my hand. Not to hold it, just for a second. Her fingers brushed against mine. She immediately pulled them back. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought." She stopped talking. I looked at her. "You thought what?" She smiled nervously. "Nothing." I wasn't sure if she was embarrassed or hoping I would do something. Without really thinking, I reached over. This time, I gently took her hand myself. She looked down at our hands, then back at me. She didn't say a single word. She simply smiled, and she didn't let go. Charlotte looked at our hands for a long moment. Then she smiled. She didn't squeeze my hand. She didn't pull away. She simply kept walking beside me as if this had always been the most natural thing in the world. The evening breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, crickets had already begun their nightly chorus. "I've wanted to do that before," I admitted quietly. She looked at me. "Hold my hand." I nodded. "I just never knew if I should." A soft laugh escaped her lips. "I thought the same thing." I stopped walking. "You did." She nodded. "So many times." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 12 years. And neither of us had the courage to take one small step. Charlotte looked down at the road. "I guess we were both afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Losing what we already had." Her answer made perfect sense. I'd never dated Charlotte because I didn't want to lose my best friend. And maybe she'd been protecting that same friendship all along. We reached the old wooden bridge just outside town. It had been our place since high school. Whenever one of us had a bad day, we ended up here. Whenever life became confusing, somehow this bridge always had room for another conversation. Charlotte leaned against the railing. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" I smiled. "You'd failed your driving test." She laughed. "I was crying. You were furious. I blamed the instructor. You blamed the car. I blamed everybody. You even blamed me." She covered her face with one hand. "I did, didn't I? You said I distracted you. You were talking. I was breathing." She laughed so hard that she had to wipe a tear from the corner of her eye. God, I'd missed hearing that laugh. Or maybe I'd never realized how much I loved it. The thought appeared so suddenly that it almost scared me. Loved it. Not liked. Loved. I looked at Charlotte. Really looked at her. The way the evening sun lit up her brown hair. The tiny freckles across her nose. The smile that always appeared before she laughed. How had I never noticed all these little things before? Or maybe I'd just been too afraid to admit what they meant. Charlotte caught me staring. "What?" I shook my head. "Nothing." She smiled knowingly. "You're a terrible liar." Before I could answer, her phone started ringing. She glanced at the screen. The smile disappeared. "I should take this." She stepped a few feet away. I wasn't trying to listen, but I couldn't help noticing the change in her voice. "Hi." A pause. "No, I wasn't expecting your call." Another pause. "I told you. That was a long time ago." My heart sank. Who was she talking to? She turned slightly so I couldn't see her face anymore. "I'll think about it." Another silence. "Okay. Goodbye." She lowered the phone slowly. For several seconds she simply stood there, looking at the river below. When she finally turned back toward me, she smiled. But this time, it wasn't real. Something had changed. And I had a feeling that whoever had just called her was about to change everything again. I waited until we got back to the car before I asked, "Everything okay?" Charlotte took a little longer than usual to answer. "Yeah." I knew that yeah. It was the same one she'd used 12 years earlier after her parents told her they were getting divorced. The same one she'd used after losing her first teaching job. It always meant exactly the opposite. "No," I said quietly. "Everything's not okay." She leaned against the passenger door and looked at the ground. After a few seconds, she finally spoke. "That was Daniel." I searched my memory. Daniel. Then it hit me. Her college boyfriend. The only man she'd ever dated for more than a year. I haven't heard that name in a long time. Neither had I. What did he want? She let out a slow breath. "He's moving back." I nodded. "To Vermont. Our town." For some reason, my chest tightened. He asked if we could meet. I tried to sound casual. And I told him I'd think about it. There it was again. That strange feeling. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something much harder to admit. Jealousy. I hated that word. Because jealous people usually have a reason to be jealous. Friends don't. At least, they're not supposed to. Charlotte looked at me for a long moment. You don't like this. I barely know the guy. That's not what I asked. I forced a smile. I just don't want anyone hurting you again. She tilted her head slightly. Is that really the only reason? The question landed harder than she probably intended. I looked away toward the river. I don't know. She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly walked over and stood beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. I never stopped trusting you, she said. No matter who came into my life. I looked at her. And I don't want that to change. For a second, I almost told her everything. That hearing Daniel's name had ruined my evening. That watching her smile at me over coffee suddenly meant more than it ever had. That holding her hand felt more natural than letting it go. But fear won. The same fear that had apparently followed both of us for years. So instead I smiled. It won't. She smiled back. Promise. I promise. On the drive home, neither of us mentioned Daniel again. But he never really left the conversation. He sat there, silently, between us. And for the first time in 12 years, I realized something that terrified me. If Charlotte met him, if old feelings came back, if she fell in love with someone else, I'd be too late. That thought stayed with me the entire weekend. And by Monday morning, I finally admitted something to myself that I should have understood years ago. I wasn't afraid of losing my best friend. I was afraid of losing the woman I loved. Monday felt longer than usual. Not because work was busy, because my mind refused to stay there. Every few minutes, I caught myself replaying the weekend. Charlotte's hand in mine, her smile, Daniel's phone call, and one question kept coming back. What if I'm already too late? By lunchtime, I had convinced myself I was overthinking everything. Then my phone vibrated. Charlotte, are you free after work? I smiled before opening the message. For you? Always. 3 little dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message arrived. I need your opinion about something. An hour later, we met at our usual cafe. Only this time, something felt different. Charlotte wasn't smiling when I walked in. She was stirring the same cup of coffee she'd probably forgotten to drink. Hey! I sat down across from her. You sounded serious. She nodded. I am. For a few seconds, she simply looked out the window. Then she reached into her purse. I want you to look at something. She handed me her phone. The screen was already unlocked. It was an email. From Daniel. I hesitated. You sure? She nodded. I wouldn't have shown it to anyone else. I started reading. Daniel apologized for disappearing years ago. He wrote that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. That he'd never stopped thinking about her. That moving back home felt like a second chance. And then, one sentence caught my attention. I'd like to take you to dinner this Friday, if you're willing to give us another chance. I slowly put the phone back on the table. Charlotte watched my face the entire time. So, what do you think? I wanted to say no. Immediately, without thinking, without pretending to be reasonable. Instead, I forced myself to answer like the friend she'd always trusted. I think. I paused. You should do whatever makes you happy. She didn't answer. She simply kept looking at me, almost as if she were waiting for a different answer. Finally, she asked quietly, and what if I want your honest opinion? My heart started pounding. You already have it. No. She slowly shook her head. That was your polite opinion. I want the real one. I looked down at the table. For the first time in years, I realized I couldn't keep hiding behind friendship. Not anymore. I took a slow breath, then looked her straight in the eyes. I don't want you to go. Silence. Charlotte didn't seem surprised. She almost looked relieved. Why? She whispered. There it was. The question I'd unknowingly been avoiding for 12 years. And this time, I knew there was no turning back. I looked into her eyes. For the first time in 12 years, I wasn't looking at my best friend. I was looking at the woman I couldn't imagine my life without. I let out a slow breath. Because the words caught in my throat. She didn't interrupt. She simply waited, just like she always had. I don't want another man getting the chance I've been wasting for years. Charlotte didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared at me. I've spent 12 years convincing myself we were better off as friends. I laughed quietly. What an idiot. A tear appeared in the corner of her eye. I kept telling myself that if I ever said the wrong thing, I'd lose you. Another tear followed. But then, I smiled. I accidentally called you, babe. She laughed through her tears. That's true. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times already. So have I. I shook my head. You know what's funny? What? I thought I'd ruined everything. She smiled. You did. My heart dropped. She reached across the table before I could react. Her hand gently covered mine. You ruined every excuse I had for hiding how I felt. For a second, couldn't breathe. What? She laughed softly. I've loved you for years, William. The cafe disappeared. The people. The music. Everything. There was only Charlotte. I was terrified. So was I. I dated other people because I thought you would never see me that way. I closed my eyes for a second. I was jealous of every one of them. She smiled. I know. I opened my eyes. You knew. William. She laughed. You've never been good at hiding your feelings. I thought I was. You were terrible. I couldn't help laughing too. 12 years. 12 years. I can't believe we were both this stubborn. She squeezed my hand. We're here now. A waiter walked past our table. He looked at us, then smiled. I guess today's coffee turned into something bigger. Charlotte laughed. You have no idea. When he walked away, we both sat there smiling like teenagers. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me since the bridge. What about Daniel? Charlotte didn't even hesitate. She picked up her phone, opened his email, then looked at me. I already have my answer. Before I could say anything, she pressed delete. The message disappeared. She locked her phone, slid it back into her purse, and looked at me. I've been waiting for one man to fight for me. She smiled. I'm really glad he finally did. I stood up, walked around the table. She stood too. For a second, we simply looked at each other. Then I wrapped my arms around her. She hugged me tighter than anyone ever had. Quietly, almost whispering, she said, Can you call me that again? I smiled. What? She looked into my eyes. Babe. I laughed. You really liked it, huh? She nodded. I loved it. I gently brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. I love you, babe. Tears rolled down her cheeks again. I love you too. A few months later, Grandma Eleanor invited us over for Sunday dinner. The moment we walked through the front door holding hands, she looked at us, smiled, and folded her arms. It took you too long enough. Charlotte laughed. You knew. Grandma looked at me. I knew before either of you did. I shook my head. Why didn't you tell us? She smiled. Because some stories can't be rushed. She pointed at Charlotte. He had to find the courage. Then she pointed at me. And you had to realize the woman you were looking for had been walking beside you all along. I looked at Charlotte. She smiled exactly the same way she had outside that little cafe. The day I accidentally called her babe. Only now, I knew that it hadn't been an accident at all. Maybe my heart had known the truth long before I did. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, I'd truly appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. And if you've ever experienced a friendship that turned into something more, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I read every comment, and your support truly means the world to me. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.